Hello, everyone. My name is Bob Leone, and I'm the lead for Outreach and Communications with the Global Health Fellows Program. I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar today and let you know how excited we are about the presentation we've prepared for you. It's really great that so many of you are able to attend. At the moment, we have more than 250 participants online with us. I hope that you'll find the information interesting and, above all, useful. As you know, we've solicited some questions from you in advance, and we've received quite a number of them, which is really great. And we've been able to incorporate the answers to many of those questions into the presentation that you're about to experience. You'll also have opportunities to ask more questions throughout the presentation via the Q&A feature, and we'll answer those questions at the end of the presentation. And one thing I'd just like to sort of mention is that the information that we're going to present are really guidelines, but when you're applying for specific positions, please read and follow the specific directions that they give you. And some of the themes and points that we're going to be addressing in the presentation are, in a general way, let your passion for the work shine through. Be sincere. Think about ways that you can incorporate transferable skills into your materials. And be realistic about the positions that you're applying for. So you really want to read a scope of work very carefully and think, is this really a good fit for my skills and experience? And always the materials that you produce should be relevant to the position. And so in that vein, you want to tailor the materials that you're submitting each time. Also, thinking about the importance of developing country experience and cultural competency. And if you have specific stories and examples, have those ready to tell in sort of brief, succinct sound bites. And finally, as far as resumes are concerned, at that final phase of your resume, make sure that everything you have in there is correct and visually inviting. If you have any technical difficulties at any time, please call the number on the screen or submit a question through the Q&A function. You might want to jot that number down now for future reference. I'm sure that you're all eager to get started, but before we begin, there are a few other housekeeping items that I'd like to go over with you. I mentioned the Q&A feature, so this is how you can access that. And you can ask questions at any point throughout the presentation, and we'll gather those up and do our best to answer as many of them as we can at the end. And also keep in mind that some of the questions you answer may already be addressed within the content that we've prepared. And just as a reminder, if you could send your question to all panelists, that would be very helpful. We're really very pleased and excited to be able to offer a new feature to our webinars this time around, and that's closed captioning. And the following slides will explain how you can best access that feature on your computer. So the closed captioning will appear in the media viewer, which should be in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Then you're going to want to click on the Show/Hide header, also in the bottom right. Then you're going to want to enter the full screen mode by clicking on the left-hand corner of your screen. And to view Media Viewer in full screen, you'll want to access the floating bar, which is at the top of your screen, and click on the arrow to the far right, and then click on Media Viewer. And then to view a Q&A in full screen, click again on that arrow to the far right and click on Q&A, and this will allow you to submit questions. And then finally, you have the opportunity to resize windows, the various windows as you see fit. Please note that a transcript of the spoken content will be available after the webinar, and there is also going to be a recording that will be available. And they'll both be on our website, www.ghfp.net, within 1 week following this event. And just to give you a brief overview of what you can expect during the next 90 minutes or so, here's a preview of what we're going to be covering. And the major focus really is to provide you with some concrete tools for shaping your cover letter and your global health resume, and also tips for effective interviewing. I would encourage you to think of this as a process with many small yet important moving parts. Our panel of experts will be talking in depth about each of these specific parts and why they're important and how they all fit together. So each one is significant because it helps to build up a picture of who you are professionally and what it is you have to offer. We have some great presenters with us today, and I'd like to introduce them to you now. Jennifer Kaindi is GHFP-II's Senior Recruiter. Jennifer has extensive experience as a recruiter in the development field and has filled hundreds of specialized positions for both Washington, D.C.-based and developing country openings. Our other presenter is also Jennifer, and this is Jennifer Russell, and she's GHFP-II's Recruitment and Communications Specialist. Jennifer Russell is extremely familiar with the scopes of work and has reviewed thousands of resumes in her time with the program. I'd also like to thank Star Tiffany and Sylvie Rousseau for their technical support. Throughout the presentation, we're going to be asking a few questions of you, and you can respond to those through the polling feature, which you can see up on the slide here. And I would encourage you to participate if you're able to. And then we're going to be sharing the results of those polls at different times during during the presentation. And so here are our first two poll questions. The first one is, what is your current level of education? So if you would just choose that in the lower right-hand corner there. And this poll is going to be open for 3 minutes, so you have 3 minutes to actually submit your answer. And also don't forget to click Submit at the lower right when you're finished. And then the second poll question is, what is your professional experience? So if you would take a look at those options and choose one, that would be great. And as I said earlier, we'll be sharing the results of our poll questions with the audience a little bit later on. And now, before we get into the bulk of the presentation, I'd like to just give you a brief overview of the Global Health Fellows Program, and also a little bit about the U.S. Agency for International Development. GHFP-II works with USAID by recruiting, placing, and supporting fellows and interns to work with the agency in Washington, D.C. and overseas, and by providing them with career and professional development support. These global health professionals are representative of the diversity of the American people and serve as important contributors to USAID's success in key global health priority areas. Currently, we have 126 active fellows and a cohort of 30 summer interns working with USAID. We also work with other organizations, including GlobeMed, and they provide developing country internships at the undergraduate level. In addition to the Global Health Bureau at USAID, we have fellows based currently in Uganda, Rwanda, Mali, Tanzania, Namibia, Ethiopia, Burkina Faso, and Indonesia. And that's really a constantly changing roster of countries. The fellowships are for 2 years duration, often with an option to extend for an additional 2 years. And they are fully paid and benefited positions at different levels of expertise. Our summer internships are for 12 weeks. They are compensated positions, and the interns are based in Washington, D.C. If you'd like to see or apply for any of our openings, please visit us at www.ghfp.net, where you can also sign up for our listserv, and we'll send you the openings as they become available. And to give you a little bit of an idea of the scope of the actual work that our fellows and interns do, these are some of the technical specialties that they're involved in. As you can see, it's quite a broad range. I mentioned USAID earlier. They're our funder, and as you can see by the map, they have quite a substantial presence in the developing world. They are the largest development organization in the world. They've been in existence for more than 51 years, and they are the development arm of the U.S. government. So they implement the U.S. government's foreign policy, foreign assistance agenda, rather. And global health is their largest portfolio. It's approximately $5.5 billion for fiscal year 2012. And now I'd like to announce the results of polls 1 and 2. We could see those. So if you want to just take a look there over to the right, this gives you a little bit of an indication of what this audience is actually made up of in terms of their education levels and professional experience. Now we're going to move on to the part that you've all been waiting for, and we call this the how to stand out in a really, really big crowd section. And kind of the background for that is that many people have similar backgrounds and education levels, and organizations like ours and many others receive a large number of resumes for each of the positions that we have. So the thing that I think really concerns people is how can they stand out in that, in that large pack of people. So that's really what this presentation is about, is giving you some ideas and some ways to really showcase yourself in the best possible way. And so at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Jennifer Russell.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. So the first thing that I'm going to talk to you about is the scope of work. When you're interested in applying for a position, the first thing that you need to do is read the scope of work. And I mean really read the scope of work. And this is for 2 reasons. First, you want to make sure that you meet the position requirements so that you can determine if you're even eligible to apply. And second, if you are eligible, you're going to want to have a good understanding of what the employer is looking for so that you can tailor your cover letter and resume to the position. This slide shows a few examples of the type of requirements that you might see. When you're reading through the requirements, all of the words are important, but I'm going to highlight a few of the key words and requirements that stick out to me. So master's degree, 5 to 12 years, public policy and communication, and 2 years international or resource challenge setting. Excuse my highlighting, but basically when you're reading these requirements, think about your own professional experience and see if it matches up with what the employer is looking for. Using these example requirements, if you have 2 years of experience in public policy and communication with 2 months of experience in an international resource challenge setting, you're likely underqualified for the position. Conversely, if you have 20 years of experience in public policy and communication, in which 8 years of your experience was in an international or resource challenge setting, you're likely overqualified for the position. We're looking for the right fit for a position, and having more experience than what is required isn't always the best thing for the recruiter. However, if you think that you might be overqualified for a position, but still think that you're a great fit and want to apply, you might want to focus your resume and cover letter on the technical experience that you do have and how it matches with the position you're applying, and de-emphasize how many years of experience that you have. Also, it's similar for if you're underqualified. I mean, if you're close to the years of experience that they're looking for, you could always emphasize the technical skills that you do have, and then don't emphasize the number of years that you have. You just really want to spend enough time talking about the skills that you have that match up with what they're looking for. Here's a couple more examples of position requirements, and I'm again going to highlight some of the keywords for you. So HIV/AIDS, communications, implementation, and execution. So again, you want to think about the experience that you do have. If you're a visual person, look at your resume. And if you believe that you have the experience that the employer is looking for and feel that you would be able to fill the role, you should apply. Besides looking at the position requirements, you'll also want to pay particular attention to the roles and responsibilities listed in the scope of work. When you're reading through the scope of work, jot down the keywords and responsibilities. Then, when you're tailoring your cover letter and resume to the position, you can emphasize them in your cover letter and resume. By tailoring your application documents to the position, you're clearly letting the recruiter know that you have the skills and experience that they're looking for. So I'm going to, again, highlight a few of these words in here for you that stick out as keywords to me. So point person, gender-related, interagency, and working groups. Those are the words that really stick out to me when I look at this. So if you have experience with serving as a point person and serving on a working group, jot those things down. If you do not have direct experience with either, think about the transferable skills that you do have. When I hear point person, I think of someone having technical expertise on a given issue. In this example, it would be gender. When I hear working group, I think of the experience of working on teams. And when I hear interagency, I think of collaborating with multiple partners. And many of you, if you've worked in global health or working in public health, you've done a lot of these transferable skills. So you really want to take the time to read through the scope of work. And even if you don't have direct experience, think about the type of experience that you do have that you can talk about in your cover letter and resume. So here's another sample role and responsibility. Again, look for the key words that you can highlight in your own experience. So I'm going to highlight again. So technical leadership and oversight are the words that stick out to me. When looking at it, you'll want to think about the relevant experience that you do have, both transferable and direct experience. They're looking for someone who can provide technical leadership and oversight. If you've worked on programming related to gender, you have a level of technical expertise. If you also have gender programming experience in the areas of health system strengthening, men's engagement, and youth and gender, you'll also want to jot this down so that you highlight that experience in your application documents. Here's another requirement. I'm just going to give you a couple seconds to look for the keywords. Okay, to me the keywords that stick out are compile, develop, write, policies, strategies, and reports. If you have policy or report writing experience, you would want to highlight this experience in your resume and cover letter. You can also think about what sorts of transferable skills you might have. When I see the word compile, a transferable skill could also be putting together literature reviews, as it would show an applicant's ability to find and collect numerous studies and documents on a particular subject. So to conclude this section, when you're interested in applying for a position, you really want to take the time to go over the scope of work to make sure that you really understand what they're looking for, and also take note of the key words so that you can highlight them in your application documents. It is something that recruiters have to do as well. We have to really know the scope of work so that when we're looking at applications, we can pick out the people who have the right background for the position. You can really enhance your chance of sticking out by taking the time to tailor your application documents to the position. In doing so, you let the recruiter know that you understand what the recruiter is looking for and that you're a great fit and have the skills and experience that are needed.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. I just would like to remind folks that the Q&A feature is still available, so if you have questions that you'd like to submit, please feel free to do so. And could we move to the next slide, please? And again, just a reminder, if some of you have joined later, that closed captioning is available in Media Viewer. And we will be having a transcript available on our website within a week. And now I'd like to introduce Jennifer Kaindi, our other Jennifer on the project, and she's our senior recruiter, and she's going to be talking about cover letters.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us on this webinar. In this section, I will cover the cover letter. Why is it important for us to have cover letters? Cover letters are the first impressions, and first impressions are critical. What should a cover letter contain? A cover letter should complement your resume and not duplicate it. You want to keep it short, memorable, and error-free. A cover letter is your way of demonstrating your interest and passion for this position or for the position that you're applying for, and it's your chance to identify the most relevant skills and experience that you have. It is also your opportunity to use the relevant terms and phrases from the description, as Jen Russell, who I'll reference her as Jen, mentioned earlier. Now, what do we as employers look for, and why is it important for you to do a cover letter? In a cover letter, we assess your interest, your motivation, and your writing skills. We also assess your understanding of the position, which is why it's very important to read through your scope of work. Now, this is the poor example of what an introduction of a cover letter should contain. Looking at this, the person only mentions, I am interested in a position, we don't know which one, and that they meet all the criteria that we think the position is about, and is drawn to the overseas travel. And that's all that they've told us at this point. Now, this is a better example of what an introduction should contain. This is where you would indicate the title of the position to which you're applying to and where you learned about this position. You should also include the name of the organization. The previous slide where we saw the poor example obviously was a generic cover that was probably sent to several other companies, which is why it's not specific. And this implies to us that you're not, one, that you didn't tailor your resume, your cover letter, sorry, and that you didn't spend time to research the organization, which questions your interest. This is also, the introduction is also where you would describe briefly who you are. And also, it's also important to keep in mind that a cover letter is a formal letter. Okay, in this next slide, this is again another poor example of what I would call the body of the cover letter. Again, in this example, I attached my resume. I can't wait to learn about the organization, where the person lives, when they will relocate, etc., which again is not relevant information for the recruiter or the hiring manager. This is a better example of what the body of a cover letter should have. This person describes their experience, their particular experience. They designed training programs in reproductive health, what the outcome was, which organization they worked with or agencies, and about what skills, specific skills they acquired from that experience. So this section should cover is what captures the attention of the hiring manager and the recruiter, which is why it's very important to make sure that you describe your relevant skills and qualifications that pertain to that position and not your entire life history. This is where you want to showcase the key points that appear on the job description or the scope of work that you believe you have that are relevant to the position. And this is also your opportunity to relate your transferable skills that Jen talked about to the ones required for the position. In this next slide, again, this is a poor example of what I would call a closing of the cover letter. As you can see, there are several phone numbers, several emails, several different times when this person can be reached. And it's very confusing, obviously, to the recruiter or a hiring manager. This is what we recommend a closing should have. This person reiterates their interest and motivation or eagerness to work in this organization. And they focus, this is where you can focus on what you have to offer or what you bring to the table. This person only provides one number and one email that they can be reached. And this is what we would recommend for you to have on your cover letter. And again, it would be great if you could thank them for their time.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. And now we have our third poll question, which is up on the screen there. How often do you tailor your resume to a specific job opening? Always, frequently, sometimes, never. So this poll is going to be open for 1.5 minutes. So if you would like to respond to that, that would be great. And now I'm going to turn this back to Jennifer Russell, and she's going to speak to us about resumes.
Thanks, Bob. So as Bob mentioned, next I'm going to talk to you about resumes. It's really important to tailor your resume to the position that you're applying to. And so that you don't have to recreate the wheel every time you apply, you might consider creating a master resume. With your master resume, you'll want to include all of your professional positions, which can include jobs, internships, and volunteer positions, listing all of your tasks and accomplishments. Then when you're applying for a position, you can pare that resume down and highlight the experience that is most relevant to the position. Another thing that you'll want to consider when creating your master resume is which type of resume is best for you, chronological or functional, as there are pros and cons with each style. Chronological resumes are straightforward, easy for the recruiter to scan, and easy to highlight your achievements for each position. However, with a chronological resume, it's also easy to see gaps and deficiencies in an applicant's work history. Functional resumes are organized by thematic skills or job functions, so they can be great for those wanting to transition their career or for those just beginning their career. Functional resumes also give an applicant greater control over how you organize your resume, allowing you to highlight relevant skills and experience and de-emphasize recent irrelevant experiences. However, functional resumes are harder for the recruiter to scan and can also make it look like the applicant is hiding something in their work history. So it's important to consider resume formatting options when you're working on building your master resume. This slide shows the areas that you'll want to cover in your resume. Given your experience and background, you may not cover every single area. You might also choose to leave some areas out if it's not critical to the position you're applying to. For example, if having published articles seems irrelevant to the position in which you're applying, you might leave out the publication section. Or you might consider powering down your list and leaving the articles that are most relevant. For example, if you're applying for a position related to HIV/AIDS treatment and you've published articles on the subject, you might choose to list them as it shows your technical expertise in that area. Next, we're going to talk about some of these sections in more depth. The top half of your resume is really, really important, as you need to be able to capture the recruiter's attention quickly. One way that you can do this is to have a summary of qualifications section in your resume. Sometimes this is referred to as a professional summary or a summary of skills, but basically this is the first section that falls right under your name and contact information. I like to think of the summary of qualifications as your power statement or your selling point. In this section, you want to highlight your skills and experience that are most relevant to the position in which you're applying. So again, you're tailoring this to the position. This slide lists some examples that you might see in a summary of qualifications. These examples are very targeted and qualify the applicant's skills. For example, rather than saying something more generic like experienced in program implementation, the applicant has given the recruiter more detailed information with a number of years, in this case 10, and where they conducted the implementations in Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. In the fourth bullet, the last example, rather than just stating developed protocols for diagnosis, the applicant is able to show that what they developed was adopted and later used. By highlighting these types of skills and accomplishments in the top of your resume, you'll be able to capture the recruiter's attention when they're looking at it. Unless you're currently in school or a recent graduate, we always suggest that you lead your resume with your professional experience rather than listing your education and degrees first. Again, the top half of your resume is really important, so you want to be able to catch the recruiter's attention with the relevant experience that you have. Now this slide gives you an idea of how the education section of your resume should look. You're going to want to list the full name of your educational institutions in reverse chronological order. Be sure to spell out any acronyms and program titles, as a recruiter might not know what they stand for. You can also include any specialized training and certificates in your education section. If you received a Master of Public Health and specialized in infectious diseases, this is important to put in your resume as it lets the recruiter know that you have specialized training in that area. We do not want to see the long list of courses that you've taken in your education section. Seeing your degree and any specializations is enough information, so no need to list courses. We also suggest that you leave out GPA from your education section. However, you should note any study abroad semesters as well as scholarships, as it lets the recruiter see how you stand out. So in these examples, there's an awarded a merit-based scholarship for half tuition, and also the bottom, the Bachelor of Arts, shows that the person studied abroad, and also was awarded 2 travel grants. So that kind of lets us know that how that person stands out. So next we're going to talk about the experience section of your resume. As I mentioned before, unless you're a current student or a recent graduate, you want to lead your resume with your experience. And experience includes paid professional positions, internships, volunteer positions, and paid or unpaid consultancies. I have seen so many resumes where it appears that the applicant has little relevant experience until I turn to page 3, where they finally listed their internships and volunteer positions. Even though the applicant had lots of experience, they buried it. If a position, paid or unpaid, is relevant to the position in which you're applying, please list it in the experience section of your resume. You're going to want to list your most relevant experience in reverse chronological format. And when you're listing your experience, you want to try to use action words as much as possible that highlight results. Whenever appropriate, you also want to use numeric values that quantify what you have done. One approach you can take in the experience section of your resume is called the STAR approach, which stands for situation, task, action, result. Situation would be the setting or background, which gives the recruiter the context of the situation. Task would be the tactics that you use to approach or address the challenge. Action would be the actions that you took that helped affect the change. And the result would be the outcome and the quantifiable benefit. So here's an example of a STAR approach. Recruited and mobilized 10 community-based organizations based in Uganda for participation in a series of 3 gender-based violent workshops. Doubled participation in the workshops from the previous year, reaching over 250 individuals. So the applicant has given the recruiter both an overview of the situation, what they did, they recruited and mobilized, and the result too that they mobilized 10 community-based organizations with gender-based violence workshops, 3 of them, and they reached over 250 individuals. So that gives a better picture than just a simple laundry list of tasks. So this slide shows an example that might be listed under experience. What I really like about this is that the person has quantified what they did. For example, just stating that they developed communication materials for gender-based violence training would be far less powerful and revealing. This example is good because the applicant has given the recruiter more details by stating that they collaborated with stakeholders in 3 program countries. Here's another example. When looking at resumes, I find that I often see tasks written out in a laundry list fashion, like conducted literature reviews or conducted research. It's really important that you tell the recruiter what you conducted research on and how the research was used. In this example, the applicant lets the recruiter know that they conducted research on integrating psychosocial issues, which was used by mission staff on regional workshops on gender-based violence. Again, in this example, the applicant is highlighting one of their accomplishments. This applicant successfully managed the creation of a tracking system for contract administrator, which was later used by a contract administration, which was later used by a subcontractor. It is really important that you think about the accomplishments in your current and past positions so that you can highlight them in your resume, because it's something that recruiters really want to see. Again, in this example, the applicant has quantified their experience, which is really important. Rather than just stating wrote reports, the applicant lets the recruiter know that they wrote 7 reports. The applicant also lets the recruiter know that the reports were used to improve implementation. This is important to note because it lets me know that the reports just didn't go and sit on the shelf somewhere. They were actually utilized. So for the last slide, I'm just going to go over a few of the don'ts. So in your resume, you don't want to name drop unless it's relevant to the story that you're telling. Definitely don't submit sloppy materials. You really need to make sure that you look over your resume, look for errors, make sure that the font, sometimes there won't be errors, but the font will be all different, or there'll be double spacing one spot and single spacing another, and it just looks really sloppy. And that resume and cover letter are the first things that you're showing the recruiter as examples of your work that you can do. So if they're sloppy, then they're probably not going to consider you, even if you have the right skills. So you really need to make sure that your materials, are well edited, no spelling mistakes, and formatted right. And you can always have other people look over your materials just to have another set of eyes. Make sure that you're not repetitive in your resume, using the same information over and over. We've seen resumes with the same exact tasks listed for the past 3 positions. And, we know it isn't possible that the 3 jobs were exactly the same. It just seems very lazy, and, we're not going to consider that person if it's the same exact things. You really want to try to figure out how to highlight different things in your experience so you're not just listing the same things over and over again. Definitely don't stretch the truth to make yourself more interesting. If you completed a project with a team, make sure that you say that you completed it with a team and don't just take all the credit for yourself. And, a lot of global health work is very collaborative too, so we definitely appreciate seeing when it's been a team project, for example. So you're just trying not to grandize your experience. You want to highlight the things that you've done, but you don't want to over-exaggerate. You don't need to include references in your resume, and also don't put references available upon request. If you're selected for an interview, we know that we can request references from you, so you don't need to, waste space with that. And the last thing I'm going to suggest is don't include personal things in your resume like marital status, nationality, birth date, pictures, personal information about family, religion, ethnicity, or any other protected class, passport numbers, ID information, and social security numbers. So those are all personal things that you just don't want to put in your resume because they're not necessary.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. I think that there was some really valuable information there. And we put this slide up just for a tiny bit of comic relief. You could see that these are obviously snippets of information that really shouldn't find a place on your resume, but it's amazing what kinds of things people include, and we've seen it all pretty much. At this point, I'd like to announce the results of our poll number 3. So I can see that actually a great number of you do tailor your resume, so that's really great. And for those of you that don't, you know, consider it, especially based on the information that you're getting today. And now for our final poll question. How often do you have a good understanding of the organization to which you are applying? Always, frequently, sometimes, or never? And we're going to keep this one open for a minute and a half. And just as a reminder, you can still submit questions through our Q&A feature. And for those of you that may have come in later, there's a closed captioning feature that's available in Media Viewer, which should be in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. And now I'd like to turn this back over to Jennifer Kaindi, who will give us some inside tips about effective interviewing.
Thank you, Bob. In this section, I will go over how to prepare for an interview. As we've heard over and over again, it's very, very important to read the scope of work. This will be instrumental in making sure you have the information that you would need to talk about or describe the skills and qualifications that you have to the interview team. Another important thing we would recommend that you do is research the organization to which you're applying to. It's very impressive to the interview team if you're able to describe some of the work that that you've learned or have researched that the company does or the organization does. If you go to an interview and have no idea what the organization does, it's not as impressive. We would also recommend anticipating interview questions, and you can find a lot of good examples of interview questions on the web. So it's very important to prepare, and this will also help you prepare with good examples. So examples of interview questions might be, tell me about your work with this organization, what projects did you work on, what is your greatest challenge? If you've already gone over some of these questions, you'll have some ready answers. So it's very important to prepare and anticipate interview questions. It's also very important to review your resume. Know what's on your resume. You'll be surprised at what people have said when asked about an experience. And in one instance, we had someone talk about a certain, the person was asked about a certain experience, which was on their resume. And when asked about it, they had no idea what the interview team was talking about, and couldn't describe what experience or even that they even worked there. So it's very important to know and review your resume and keep it updated. And always remember that Your resume is your ticket to getting an interview, which is why we emphasize the need to tailor and spending time, again, updating and reviewing it. Also prepare questions for the team. And actually looking at the scope of work, you can come up with questions about what the particular position would entail, specific questions. And this looks very impressive to the interview team. And you can also ask about what do you expect for the position to achieve in the first year would be another good question to ask an interview team, or who or which partners would I be collaborating with in this particular project or positions. The questions you don't want to ask is, will I sit in a cubicle or office? This shows that you're not particularly interested in the position, but other logistical and at that point irrelevant pieces that would be handled after an offer is made. And also we would recommend practicing, having mock interviews. Find a friend that you can practice interview questions with. Okay, so during your interview, you want to make sure that you answer each question in its entirety. Some questions have several other parts. I would recommend definitely bringing a notepad and pen to take down some of these notes to make sure that you've answered all the pieces. And if you're not sure, you can ask the interview team if you've answered the question that they had. And if you didn't, then this would give you a chance to make sure that you answer all the pieces that were missing. And again, provide examples for the work that you have done. You will be asked technical questions that focus on your relevant experience. Please answer them, even if that information is on the resume. We have had people who refer to their resume instead of answering what the question was, and all they would say is, it's on my resume, exactly what's on my resume, and that doesn't tell the interviewer much. Or others just provide yes, no answers, and again, you have to remember that this is your chance to sell your skills to the organization and prove that you are the best candidate for the position. Also, the organization is assessing your ability to respond, to analyze, and to present your skills and qualifications. And they want to make sure that you have what it takes to do the job, and you do so by your presentation of your experience at the interview. You will also be asked behavioral questions that would focus on your soft skills, such as teamwork, as Jen mentioned. Come with examples that would talk about your teamwork experience or conflict resolution, etc. You do also want to thank the interview team and collect any contact information so that you can send thank you notes by email or by mail. But make sure when you do send your thank you notes that they are substantive and they touch on some of the points that you talked about during the interview. And this is also an opportunity to correct anything that may have been misconstrued or expand on what was talked about. And also anything that you thought about later that you may have missed out. So this would present that opportunity to do so. So what about your surroundings? Let's say you have a phone interview. You want to make sure that the environment that you plan to have this interview in is free of distractions. You want to find a location that's private, at least for that duration of time. You want to make sure that you have the location you've selected has good cell phone coverage if you're using a cell phone. If you have a landline, of course, that's even more preferable. Have your resume ready when you're having this phone interview, as well as the scope of work or any other application materials that you submitted. And again, you do want to have your notepad and pen so that you can take important points to send your thank you notes. What if it's a Skype or video interview, as we see a lot more of? You want to test your technology beforehand. You want to focus the camera on you, and you want to make sure there's adequate lighting at this location where you'll put your computer. And you want to look straight at the camera. Make sure you have a plain background to minimize any other distractions, and pay attention to your posture and dress appropriately since it's still an interview. We also recommend that you make sure you're fully clothed. Even if the camera captures your top half of the body, you never know when you may have to get up to get something. And most important of all, smile. Okay. So for your remote interview, which may be by phone or Skype or video, make sure during the interview you identify yourself when you answer and answer professionally. You also want to ensure that you have a professional voicemail message in case you miss the call. We hope you wouldn't. And then listen carefully during the interview. Ask that they repeat a question if you need more time to answer or didn't capture much of it or most of it. You want to speak clearly and concisely to make sure that everyone hears your responses. And you also want to write important points that will help when crafting your thank you note, as we noted earlier. And again, ask questions as it shows your interest with the position and that you took the time to research the position and the organization. And as always, bring your confidence and smile as it comes through on the phone. Okay. So when invited for an in-person interview, arrive at least 15 minutes early. If you're running late, notify the organization immediately. If you don't, this portrays your lack of interest or that it's not important to you. Again, you want to bring your notebook and pen to take notes. You want to dress professionally. And if it's a panel interview, make sure you look at all the panelists when answering and try to ask them all questions. Also, get their business cards so that you know who you talk to. And if you get this before the interview, you can lay them on the table in the order in which they sit so you can remember their names throughout the interview. And at the end of the interview, ask what the next steps are and thank them. Okay. So beyond your resume, you always want to maintain a professional virtual image. Google yourself to see what information is out there about you. If you have a Facebook or any other social networking content, block those from public view. If you have any unprofessional pictures and blog posts, make sure to take them down. If you have a LinkedIn profile, keep it professional as more and more companies are sourcing through LinkedIn, and also make sure that you keep it current to increase your chances of being selected. We do very often now go to LinkedIn to source potential candidates. And always remember that we do background checks, and a lot of companies and organizations do background checks. Otherwise, over to you, Bob.
Great. Thanks very much, Jennifer. I'd just like to remind you that you can still submit some questions to the panel through our Q&A feature. And as I mentioned earlier, we did gather up quite a few questions from people during the registration process for the webinar. And some of those were answered within the context of the presentation. And then there were others which we thought were really important and we wanted to address kind of separately. So here's the list of the ones that we have. And I'm just going to kind of go through them and ask Jennifer Russell and Jennifer Kaindi if they would address these. So I'm going to start with Jennifer Russell. Could you talk a little bit about length of CV or resume? And I see through the questions that are coming in now that that's a question has been asked several more times. So if you could maybe sort of illuminate that situation a little bit.
Sure. Well, first, you always want to follow the instructions. Every organization is different. Like for us, for example, when you're applying for our internships, we do have a length of 2 pages, and you should follow that because it's a requirement. And if you don't follow it, you know, it looks like that you're just not following instructions. But otherwise, for our fellowships, we don't set a requirement. And if an organization doesn't have a requirement, my advice is always your CV and resume should be the length that it needs to be to have the most relevant information. So it could be 2 pages, it could be 3 pages, whatever it needs to be. I mean, it should be targeted to the position. You should have the most relevant information. So it should be whatever length that it needs to be.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. So the next one is lack of international experience, and I'm guessing also is how do you get some. So Jennifer Kaindi, could you take that one, please?
Yes, sure. If you lack international experience but have worked in resource-challenged settings or groups, this is where your transferable skills that we've talked about would be useful. So as long as you can relate to your experience working in a resource-challenged setting in your resume, that should suffice. If you have a chance to volunteer anywhere, we recommend that you do so, whether here in the U.S. or outside the U.S. In developing countries. If also you've worked in a domestic organization that does international work, you would emphasize that piece as well, even if you haven't actually worked in a developing country. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. The next one involves minimum requirements. So I know people always look at the requirements and think, well, I have some of these, I don't have others. Should I consider applying for this? Jennifer Russell, could you take a look at that one and give us some advice?
Sure. I think that you want to really look through the scope of work again and go through the requirements and see, think about your own skills and experience and how you measure up. If the position's asking for 10 years of experience in monitoring and evaluation and you have 2 years of experience in monitoring and evaluation, I mean, I would honestly encourage you not to apply and look for other positions that are more match up with your experience. But if there's some things that you don't have, but you have transferable skills for them, for example, serving on they want somebody who's could serve on a working group, and you've never been on a working group, but you've worked on a team that produced this new policy for a position that you're in, and that's transferable. So I mean, it takes a lot of time to really look through the scope of work, and I get that, but if you take that time, you can really figure out if you measure up, and then maybe if you do have some gaps, you can figure out how the skills that you do have would allow you to do those roles and responsibilities. But, certain requirements, certain minimum requirements, whether it's citizenship, years of experience, I mean, you want to take a hard look at those. And even if you really, really love a position, but you just don't have the years or just don't have certain things, you should maybe just keep looking for positions that do align. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. And then the next one up is the citizenship and U.S. permanent residency requirement. Could you speak to that one, Jennifer Kaindi?
Yes, I'll actually talk about the transferable skills as well, which I think you've heard throughout, that as long as you can get you have skills that can be transferable and do the same thing, then you can apply. Now, on the citizenship and U.S. permanent residency requirement, we, in terms of the Global Health Fellows Program, this for us is a requirement that we have the citizenship, U.S. citizenship and U.S. permanent residency to qualify for the position. So in this instance, for our positions, these are requirements. Thank you.
And then finally, Jennifer Russell, if you would talk a little bit about the issue of over and under qualification.
Sure. This kind of connects to when I was talking about minimum requirements. If you are overqualified, if you think you're overqualified, you still really want to apply for a position, you should really emphasize the skills that you do have and maybe de-emphasize the years. So if you have 20 years of experience and they're looking for 10, you might want to talk about how you have years of experience in X, Y, Z, but not talk about the exact number of years. Of course, when they look at your resume, they'll see, you want to still be honest, they'll see your work experience and your work history, but then maybe you'll get their interest a little more just by talking about all the skills that you have. And if you're underqualified, but you think that you have a lot of transferable skills, you're close to the minimum years and not years off, then you'll want to also emphasize the technical skills, the transferable skills that you have, and not focus on the years that you have, but really sell the experience that you do have. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. So now we're going to move on to some of the questions that we've gathered up now during the course of the webinar, and we have quite a few here. So we'll do our best to get to as many as we can. So the first one, which I think is a really interesting one, is what is the best response to tell me about your greatest weakness? So Jennifer Kayindi, would you take that one?
Yes, sure. If you get a question about your greatest weakness, you want to make sure it's not about it's not something that would that's directly related to the position. So let's say it's a position that does a lot of coordination, that needs someone who has a great attention to detail. You do not want to say that your greatest weakness is lack of organizational skills or attention to detail. So you want to think about, and this is definitely very personal to each person, think about what you think are your weaknesses, but that would not disqualify you for a position directly. And you want to be realistic about the positions that you apply to, that if that's a weakness for you, that's probably not a position that you would apply to. If the emphasis is on coordination, it's a coordination position. I hope that answers that. Thank you.
Great. So the next question we have here, is it useful to provide your LinkedIn page address on your resume? That way reviewers can see more about your work experience. Will recruiters review it if they see it on your resume? Jennifer Russell, could you take that one?
Sure. I don't think it would hurt to put in your LinkedIn at all. Definitely, as Jennifer Kayindi mentioned, a lot of recruiters do use LinkedIn. I mean, I'll often, when I'm looking at a resume or a cover letter of an applicant and I want to see more about them, I'll go on LinkedIn and search for them. So I think that it's definitely something that you should add because a lot of organizations are using it. And if they're not, it takes up a small amount of space, and it's not going to hurt to have it. So I would say yes, include it.
And here's another one, Jennifer Russell, if you could take this one also. Do you suggest bulleted points or a kind of paragraph style for the summary of qualifications section?
Sure. Either is fine. You should do what you like and what looks good for you. And definitely it should also be as long as it needs to be really targeted as well. but it's really your preference. You know, in my own personal resume, it's a paragraph, but a lot of people use bullets. So either is fine. It's just great if you have that section.
Great. Thanks. Next question, I'll direct this to Jennifer Kaindi. What is the protocol for follow-up on the part of the applicant post-interview after the thank you notes are sent?
Yes. I would say about 2 weeks. You could follow up to find out if any decision has been made. Yes, sometimes it does take a very long time to get back, maybe because of the interview schedules. If it's several interviews taking place at very different times, probably let's say different weeks, it might take much longer than the 2 weeks. But it's okay to reach out to the recruiter to find out if anything, any decision has been made, and then they will respond to you and let you know what the situation is, which could be that, you know, a decision is still pending or they're still interviewing. Thank you.
Thanks. Next question. What suggestions do you have for people with no public health experience but relevant technical experience, for example, diagnostic, development, and evaluation, trying to get into the global health arena? Jennifer Kaindi, do you have any suggestions?
Sure. Yes, that is relevant experience that you shouldn't give up on applying to public health type of positions, especially when you talk about the evaluation. So it's, again, tailor what your experiences are. Look for ways that you can match what the company or the organization is looking for to what you currently have. But yes, that's definitely transferable, and you should definitely review the scopes carefully and tailor. Thank you.
So the next question, I'm going to direct this one to Jennifer Russell. How far back should we go on our resume, particularly if we are more mature applicants?
I think that you should go back as far as you need to. I mean, you want to include your most relevant positions, so you might not include all of your work history. But there isn't really a set number, number of years. But as we always say, as you mature in your career, your resume should also mature. So, your earlier positions, you might decide to leave them off. But really, it is up to you. Just make sure that, my advice, if the employer hasn't given a set number of pages, just make sure that you include the most relevant positions right in the first page or two, because those are likely the pages that the recruiter is going to look at. They might only glance at your later pages. So just make sure that the first page or so is, the stuff that's really going to get the recruiter's attention. But other than that, there really isn't, a limit. You should just use your own discretion based on the experience that you have.
Here's what I'm going to ask Jennifer Kaindi to address. What if the job is a great fit, but your salary history is over what the position is willing to offer? I have applied for positions that required salary history, but then did not consider me because I am currently making more than they can offer. Is there anything you can suggest in that particular situation?
Yes. Maybe, unless it's required, and sometimes you can say, if you're flexible, you can say that you're flexible, because if you're moving from a different career, then you may have to be flexible about the salary, especially if you've seen that throughout it's been, for most of the positions that you've applied, that it's been much lower than what you currently make. So if you're flexible, in some cases you do have to start from somewhere, and it could be that you start that way and are able to later on move up in the organization where you can get back to the history that you had. But I would emphasize the need to, if you're flexible, to make sure that they understand that you're flexible when you apply. If you get a chance, and if you get a chance to be called in for an interview, make sure that you let them know that you are flexible with your salary. Thank you.
Great. Here's the, well, actually, there's two questions here that kind of, I think, dovetail together a little bit. So, Jennifer Russell, if you could take these. First one is, I never know whether to include my Peace Corps experience in the cumulative experience. Should that count?
Yes, 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 of course. Really, any volunteer positions, internships, paid, unpaid consultancies, Peace Corps. That was at least 2 years of your work history, and even though it's not paid like a traditional position, you are likely out in the field doing substantive work. So you definitely want to include that. And if you're more of freshly out of the Peace Corps or freshly out of school, these are also positions, even though they could be considered volunteer, that you're going to want to include right in your relevant experience. If you don't always have to call it professional experience, you can call it relevant experience and highlight that. So definitely, especially if that's your most recent kind of position or fairly recent, include that right towards the beginning of your resume.
Great. And then this one kind of dovetails into that one, I think. Are more established international volunteer organizations looked at differently or are more highly regarded than those that are less well known?
I think I mean, at least for myself, I don't necessarily look at that. I mean, of course, in some ways, if you're liaising with certain organizations, if you're working on certain things like PEPFAR within your organization, those things are important. But the name, I'm not really sure exactly how important that is. I think what matters the most is that you're doing things in the technical area that you want to work in and building on that experience. And I mean, that's what I look for. But of course, doing certain things that you can put on your resume, like working with PEPFAR, working on PEPFAR-funded projects, liaising with USAID, other organizations, other partner organizations with USAID. I mean, those things you want to highlight. But where, the organization itself, I mean, at least it's not something that I necessarily put a whole lot of weight on. I don't know if Jennifer Kayindi can add anything at all to that, or...
Yeah, I would say pretty much same as what Jennifer, you've said. Thank you.
Here's one for Jennifer Kayindi. What is the ideal length for a cover letter? Is there a maximum length at which recruiters will stop reading or disqualify? Also, would it be reasonable to hyperlink the resume to authored publications?
That's a good question. Again, you don't want to show your life history on a cover letter. You really just want to highlight the most important areas you think that position is looking for. So I would say no more than 2 pages at the most, and that's for a very experienced person. So generally, I would say one page is a good size to have, but it's not a rule or anything. It's just really making sure that you have the most relevant information, and this is where you just sell your experiences and your qualifications and show the match, especially if it's also transferable skills. Make sure that this is where you highlight how your skills match with that position if they're transferable. So this is where you make your case as to why you should be selected for that position and can do the work. So there's no actual rule, just make sure that it's only relevant information. We don't need any personal information or any other irrelevant information. And that shouldn't be really more than two pages. Should you include a link? Yes, you can if it's, again, relevant to what they're looking for and you think it can help to make a strong case for you. Thank you.
Okay, great. The next question, I'll direct this to Jennifer Russell. What is the implication of a break in my work experience due to school and other activities? How important will this be to my employer, despite my various previous experience, especially from my country of origin?
I don't think it's important to that. I would just suggest that you notate in the education section of your resume the year that you graduated from school, so that they can kind of gauge, they can look at that and see, oh, this person just graduated. That explains why they've been in school for 2 years. I mean, one thing that I'd suggest is if you have, while you were at school, if you worked on a thesis or you had any internships or anything like that, you had a practicum, that you can also include those in the experience section of your resume, so there's still something there. But really the most important thing is that you just note when you're in school so that the recruiter can gauge that that's why there was this break.
Great. I'm going to ask you to address this next one also, Jennifer Russell. If you have switched careers, then does this need to be addressed in the resume, i.e. your reason for the transition?
I think that it's definitely something that you can mention in your cover letter. I would say probably more in the cover letter, talking about how you've worked in XYZ for this many years. You really want to work in HIV/AIDS, and you can kind of, I think that's the best place to kind of address the transition. And then using your resume to really highlight the transferable skills that you have, I think that's probably the best way to do it. But I do think it's good to address that, just so it makes a little more sense to the recruiter.
Great. Jennifer Kaindi, I have the next question for you. A lot of positions have foreign language requirements. Do you have any suggestions for how to acquire these skills post-graduation?
Sure. I think there's Rosetta Stone. So if this is something that you'd like to learn, take the time to learn the foreign language. I think there are many places that offer language, including if you're still in school or can take a course at a school, and that's of interest to you, please do. If you're able to even go to a certain country that speaks the language, even better. So whatever you're capable of doing. For our positions, they're not too many have language requirements. So we do have positions that don't require any, that language is not a requirement. So you can always check to see what the scope states and apply if it's relevant. Thank you.
Great. Well, here's this next question is sort of goes back to the over-qualification issue. What does someone having a PhD convey to a recruiter? I ask because I've recently completed a PhD, but I continue to enjoy programmatic work. But I fear a PhD is viewed as an overqualification. Jennifer Russell, could you take a look at that one?
I definitely don't think having a PhD is an overqualification. I think one thing that I often see when people with PhDs are applying, they use a CV, and they spend a lot more time maybe just listing off their presentations or their papers, and that's just hard for a recruiter to kind of necessarily gauge what type of program implementation work they've done or policy work, et cetera. So it's definitely not an overqualification, but what I would suggest that you do is in your resume, you really talk about the program implementation experience that you have, or the, oops, sorry about that, or the, I'm not sure where that came from, or the things that you've published that are relevant. So just make sure you highlight that experience, and don't expect the recruiter just to be able to look at your CV and get it. So that would be my my big suggestion.
Okay, next question is for Jennifer Russell again. What is the best place to look for entry-level jobs for new grads or those with little or no experience in public health?
There's a lot of places that you can look, and I'd suggest if you're a new grad to also be willing to look for internships as well, particularly in global health, because oftentimes an internship can really be kind of the stepping stone to being able to get a position, particularly if you haven't had a lot of internships or experience yet. So be willing to look for both internships and jobs. I mean, there's just so many websites that you can look. You can look at International Career Employment Weekly, which is ICEW. There's DevX. There's just a lot. And also utilizing things like LinkedIn, too, to look for leads. But we also have a list of resources for job seekers on our website where you can also look. But there's just so many of them. DevNet. I mean, I could list off probably 50 of them, but there's a lot of good places. And you want to diversify the places that you're looking. Sometimes I'll ask people, well, where are you looking for jobs? And they'll list one place, and that's, it's not enough. If you really want to make sure you're seeing all the types of opportunities that are available. So feel free to connect with us and get that list, but I would just suggest just starting to look at some of the places that I mentioned.
Okay, next question for Jennifer Kaindi. When a writing sample is requested, what type of document should be submitted? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes, they will provide some guidelines as to what writing samples they require based on what the position or what they feel would be most relevant. So you would get some guidance, again, based on what the position requires. I hope that answers. Thank you.
And thanks, Jennifer. And then next one, I'll ask Jennifer Kaindi also. What are some examples of evidence of skill in technical leadership?
Yes, if it's, let's say, your technical expertise is in gender, you probably oversaw a project in gender, so you definitely led the implementation of an oversight of the whole project from beginning to end. You made sure everything worked as planned during the implementation. You were in charge of making sure all the documents were put together and accurate, pretty much overseeing the project, and you were the point person that everyone came to for that expertise. Thank you.
Great. Here's one. I'll ask for if Jennifer Russell could respond. For people with domestic health experience, please define the phrase resource challenged.
Okay, so a resource challenge setting would be an area in, that would be a domestic area. It could either be urban or it could be rural, where, there just aren't a lot of resources there. One place that you might hear of is Appalachia, for example, for a very rural place. There's a lot of projects and programs there to help support the population, clinics and those types of things. Or urban, there could be issues with food insecurity. There could be food deserts. So there's organizations working within these neighborhoods where there isn't an access to a lot of grocery stores. So that's another example. So just thinking about areas within the country that might not have a lot of resources, neighborhoods, et cetera, and working within those neighborhoods would give you those types of transferable skills because you are working with groups that don't have a ton of money, so you have to figure out how to use the resources you have to the best of your ability.
Great, thanks. Next question, Jennifer Russell, if you could take this one also. If you have applied to the same organization more than once for similar positions, should the cover letter be vastly different?
I think for most organizations, even if you're applying for a similar position within the organization, the position's still different, right? So, for example, we have HIV/AIDS positions, and no HIV/AIDS position is practically ever the same. They could be in different divisions. They have, they're overseeing different aspects of the program or projects. So, I mean, I could almost guarantee that you would never want to submit the same cover letter. It might not be vastly different, but you want to still catch the nuances within a scope of work when you're developing that cover letter.
And then the next one, Jennifer Russell, if you could answer this one also. Are you suggesting that every resume have a summary of qualifications? Also, does that change with each application submittal?
Yes, I definitely suggest that every resume have that summary of qualifications, because it's really that way that you're going to capture the recruiter's attention with picking out the most relevant things from your experience and how that matches up with the scope of work. So I'd say always you want to have that summary of qualifications. And then, sorry, what was the second half of the question?
Where is that question?
Oh, wait, no, I remember. Sorry.
Also,
does
that change with each application? Yeah.
And yes, definitely. So you want to read through the scope of work, see what they're looking for, and pick out the relevant things that you have from your background that you can highlight. So you definitely, I mean, I could see resumes where somebody has a summary of qualifications, but they haven't tailored it, and then it doesn't stick out to me like it would if they had tailored it. So just having a summary of qualifications isn't enough. You always want to tailor that.
Great, thank you. And then Jennifer Kaindi, could you say a little bit about the kinds of opportunities that are available for individuals with children? I'm guessing that's, for international placements.
Oh, okay. So in terms of benefits, is what I'm understanding this to be?
I think so.
Okay.
Or just maybe the viability of, being able to, if you have children, is it going to be more difficult to work internationally? Is that going to be a hindrance or not?
No, because when you apply for a position, we don't look at what your family background is, which is why we said we don't, and Jen Russell referred to this on not to have personal information in either your cover letter or your resume. So this information, we should not be privy to it until we've made an offer to you. So regardless of what your situation is, shouldn't stop you from applying for a position. That's more of a personal choice. If you have a family and you'd like to work overseas and you don't mind bringing your family with you, that's really a personal choice. But we do have allowances and benefits that would cover some of the expenses, and I would suggest looking on our website under the benefits to see what type of allowances we provide for overseas positions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. So we're almost out of time. I think we have time for one more question, and I'll give this one to Jennifer Kaindi also. How important is it to have a master's degree in comparison to getting real-world experience? What are some key decision factors to consider when choosing between going to grad school or taking up an international work experience?
Well, I'll talk on behalf of our program. Most of our positions, all our positions, require a master's degree. Yes, it's also very important to have that experience. Now, it's up to you to decide if it's an opportunity that has come up before you've had a chance to, and you don't want to miss on this opportunity. Go ahead and take the opportunity, but maybe when it's after a couple of years, if you're able to get back, then take your master's. And a lot of these countries as well have, you can join a university in whatever country that you're going to work in. If it's, they have some of these programs, and do your master's at the same time. A lot of people have get their master's degrees while having a full-time position. If you're able to do so, I would suggest going ahead and doing so. I think having a master's degree will push you even further in your career. I'm always for definitely getting a master's degree if you're able to. So if you're able to do both, then by all means, you can take a class or semester, and at some point you will graduate with a master's degree. Thank you.
Great. Well, that about wraps up all the time we have. So thanks so much to Jennifer Kaindi and Jennifer Russell for their participation today. And I just wanted to mention that if you'd like to stay in touch with us, you can see our website address up on the screen. All of our positions are on there, the current positions, and there's also an online application process. We also do informational interviews by phone, and there's a link to those on the website, and as well as to our email listserv. And we also have a presence on Facebook and LinkedIn. I'd just like to thank all of you for participating today, and best of luck in your job search.